I have always believed that China is our number one national security threat. Do the Brits see China as much of a threat as Americans do?
I think we see it as what we call an epoch-defining challenge, and we try not to. We know there are specific threats from China, whether it's in cyberspace, whether it's in espionage, whether there's the more assertive nature of China in the South China Sea, but we try to recognise. You take a step back. What's our task as diplomats and politicians and statesmen, women, and all the rest of it? It's to try and avoid a global conflict between China and the West. It's to try and work out where should we, where can we engage, where do we need to compete, and where do we need to challenge? And I think that's important rather than just bracketing everything China does as threat. You've got to try and work out. Look, there are some common interests we have. Let's try and work on those to have a load-bearing relationship, as well as being absolutely clear that what's happening in Hong Kong is not acceptable. The treatment of Jimmy Lai is not acceptable. The treatment of the Uyghurs is not acceptable. The aggressive actions in the South China Sea, etc., etc. Be clear. This is not a policy about appeasing China in any way. It's absolute clarity about the nature of the threat and the challenge, but also trying to find a way where you can have discussions and dialogue to try and avoid conflict.
But do you think we can trust them? And I guess what I'm coming from is, I remember when I was at the UN, first Trump administration, and we were hitting Germany hard on Nord Stream 2. We were hitting them hard on the dependency on Russia. And
you were right.
And I personally think that Germany owes the Europeans a huge apology, because really Merkel, who was the Putin whisperer, turned out to not be the Putin whisperer. He was playing her, I think, and I think the Europeans fell to the wayside. There's such a lesson for all of us in that, right? In the fact that just because you can have a good conversation doesn't mean they're, not trying to hurt you.
I worked very closely with Angela Merkel. I respected her a lot. I think they had a mistaken energy policy. They were too reliant on Putin and Russian gas. And we argued a lot, particularly after 2014, when Putin takes Crimea and some of the Donbass. We made the argument very strongly that Europe had to change its energy policy. We in Britain were not dependent on Russian gas, and we needed everyone in Europe to take lots of steps to become more independent. So you're completely right about that. Was Merkel naive about the nature of Putin? I always, when I had private conversations with her, she always used to say to me, look, be absolutely clear, where this guy does not share our values. He's never going to be a partner. It's always going to be adversarial. We have to try and, strengthen Europe to defend against him. So I don't think she was naive about that. But the energy policy that Germany had, particularly because they cancelled their nuclear program after Fukushima happened in Japan, I think that was a mistake. And they became, therefore, too reliant on gas, and they didn't have the capacity, as we've got in the UK, to import gas from elsewhere. So I think their mistakes were made, but I think sometimes I think people can react and think that everything she did was wrong.